Hey guys, tonight we step onto the creaking deck of a Mississippi steamboat, the air thick with river mist, and the low, lazy hum of paddle wheels slicing through muddy water. You were not just a passenger. You're stepping into the shoes of young Samuel Clemens, a restless boy with wild hair and wilder dreams, peering over the rail at the endless, winding river that will shape his destiny.
Lanterns flicker, frogs croon from the banks, and the whole world seems to float in a haze of possibility. If you were hoping for a slow drift, fair warning. Mark Twain's river journeys can be as twisty as the river itself, and you might not keep up with every bend.
But that's half the fun, right? So before you get comfortable, and take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you are listening from and what time it is. Are you riverside, city-bound, or somewhere in between? I love hearing from all corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let ease into tonight's journey together. You lean against the rail, the wood warm from the day's sun, and listen as the river tells its story. A story that, for Samuel Clemens, begins in the sleepy town of Hannibal, Missouri. Here the river is both playground and teacher, its currents whispering secrets to any child brave enough to listen. You can almost feel the mud between your toes, the tug of a fishing line, and the thrill of a raft cobbled together from scrap wood and hope. Sam's earliest memories are tangled with the river's moods. One day it's glassy and calm, reflecting the sky so perfectly you would swear you could walk right across it. The next, it's swollen and wild, churning up driftwood and rumors of distant storms. You watch as Sam and his friends, future models for Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, race along the banks, daring each other to leap from the highest bluffs or swim to the farthest sandbar.
It's a world where adventure is as common as river mud, and the only real rule is to be home before dark, preferably with all your limbs intact. Well-known fact. Mark Twain's boyhood in Hannibal provided the inspiration for his most beloved novels, and adventures of Tom Sawyer and adventures of Huckleberry Finn.
The whitewashed fence, the cave, the river, all real places, lovingly exaggerated in his stories. But here's a quirk you might not know. Young Sam was terrified of thunderstorms, convinced that each crack of lightning was aimed directly at him for some forgotten misdeed. He'd hide beneath the covers, counting the seconds between flash and boom, promising to be good, at least until the storm passed. Scholars still debate whether Twain's nostalgia for Hannibal was genuine or a clever literary mask. Was he truly longing for the innocence of youth, or was he poking fun at the very idea of an unprecon golden childhood? As you watch Sam skip stones across the water, you sense both possibilities swirling in the current. The river in those days is more than a backdrop. It's a living character, untogettical and full of mischief. You can smell the sharp tang of fish, the sweet rot of riverbank willows, and the faint smoky promise of distant steamboats. Each morning Sam wakes to the sound of whistles and the shouts of deckhands. His imagination already racing ahead of the day, he dreams of adventure, of escaping the sleepy town and following the river wherever it leads. One joke among Sam's friends: if you ever got lost, just float downstream. Eventually the river would bring you home, or at least somewhere interesting. You try to imagine what it must have felt like, standing on the edge of that vast muddy highway, knowing it could carry you all the way to New Orleans or beyond to Mike. Would you have been brave enough to jump aboard? Arthur Mead, the river is also a place of work, and Sam's family is no stranger to hardship. His father, a stern and often unlucky man, tries his hand at law and land speculation. But the Clemens household is usually one step ahead of creditors. There's a certain resilience in the air, a sense that life, like the river, will keep moving no matter what obstacles lie ahead. One obscure anecdote. As a boy, Sam once tried to unpick a stray pig from the riverbank, only to discover it belonged to the town's most cantankerous farmer. The resulting chase, Sam, pig, and furious farmer zigzagging through muddy streets became local legend, and, years later, a thinly veiled episode in one of Twain's stories. Even then, Sam had a knack for turning embarrassment into entertainment. As dusk settles, you notice the way the river changes color, shifting from brown to gold to inky blue. The fireflies come out, blinking like tiny lanterns along the shore. This Sam sits with his back against a tree, notebook in hand, scribbling down observations, snatches of dialogue, odd names, half-remembered jokes. You wonder if he realizes, even now, that he's collecting the raw material for literary immortality. The scholars still debate whether Twain's river was an actual place or a mythic space, a symbol of freedom and danger, of innocence and loss. As you drift with Sam into the twilight, you sense that the answer is both, and neither. The river is what you make of it, a mirror, a mystery, a muse. You close your eyes and let the sounds of the river lull you. You stand at the bow of a steamboat, the deck trembling beneath your feet as the paddle wheel churns up a frothy wake behind you. The river's surface glimmers with the first blush of dawn, and you can almost taste the promise of adventure in the misty air. Young Sam Clemens, barely more than a teenager, is beside you. His eyes wide, his jaw set with determination. Kay's not here to play anymore. This is the day he begins his apprenticeship under the legendary pilot, Horace Bixby, and the river is about to reveal its secret language. Sam's dream is not just to float down the Mississippi. He wants to master it. You watch as he listens to Bixby, a man with a voice like gravel and a gaze sharp enough to cut through fog. And tick. Bixby's instructions are relentless. Memorize every bend, every snag, every shifting sandbar that could turn a routine trip into disaster. So the river, you quickly realize, is no gentle friend. It's a living puzzle, and only those who learn its code survive. A well-known literary fact. Twain's years as a steamboat pilot profoundly shaped his writing, especially in its Spokane Life on the Mississippi, where he details the river's moods and dangers with loving precision next to the river's unpredictability. Its capacity for both beauty and destruction became a metaphor he returned to again and again. But here, a quirky tad Bixby, the gruff mentor, was notorious for his pranks. Once, he convinced Sam that the boat was about to hit a submerged tree, only to burst out laughing when Sam nearly jumped overboard in panic. The river, it seems, is the only thing with a wicked sense of humor. Scholars still debate whether Twain exaggerated the difficulty of learning the river's language for dramatic effect, or whether the process truly bordered on impossible. And as you listen to Bixby rattle off cryptic phrases, half Twain, quarter less, you're inclined to believe it was every bit as daunting as Twain described. You try to keep up as Sam is drilled on river charts and the endless parade of landmarks. Willow islands, sunken barges, the shifting silhouettes of distant bluffs. The river changes with every rainstorm, every season, and what was safe passage last week might be a death trap today. You can almost feel the tension in your shoulders as Bixby barks out orders, testing Sam's memory and nerve. There's no GPS, no safety net, just your wits, and whatever you can recall in the heat of the moment. Sam's days are a blur of sweat, steam, and shouted commands. At night he collapses into his bunk, the roar of the paddle wheel echoing in his dreams. You lie awake beside him, replaying the day's lessons. The difference between a harmless ripple and a deadly snag. The subtle cues that mark a hidden sandbar. the way the river's color shifts just before a storm. Amidst a sensory overload, sights, sounds, even smells become clues in the river's ongoing riddle. One night, Bixby wakes Sam with a start. "You, the pilot now," he growls, handing over the wheel. The river is shrouded in fog, the banks invisible, the current unpredictable. Your heart pounds as Sam takes the helm, his hands slick with sweat.
Every instinct screams at him to slow down, to wait for daylight, but the river waits for no one. He calls out the depths, listens for the echo of the lead line, and somehow, miraculously, steers the boat through the mist without incident. If it's a trial by water, and Sam passes, barely.
Bixby claps him on the back, his approval gruff but genuine. "You'll do," he mutters, and for the first time Sam feels like he belongs to the river. A joke floats through your mind, one Sam liked to tell later in life. "The river can make a wise man out of a fool, and a fool out of a wise man, often in the same afternoon." Oh, wow! You can't help but chuckle, imagining the countless pilots who learned that lesson the hard way. The days blur into weeks, the weeks into months. You and Sam develop a sixth sense for the river's moods, reading its surface like a living map. So there's a rhythm to it all, the pulse of the paddle wheel, the calls of the crew, the distant cry of a whippoorwill at dusk. You begin to understand why Twain later described the river as a book that never ends, each page turned by the current, each chapter rewritten by the rain. One obscure anecdote: during his apprenticeship, Sam kept a secret notebook filled with sketches of the river's quirks, odd-shaped trees, peculiar rocks, even the faces of rival pilots. He'd annotate them with sarcastic comments and imagined conversations, a habit that would later blossom into his trademark wit. That notebook, sadly, was lost when Sam left the river, but fragments of it survive in his letters and stories. Arming out there, perhaps, a catfish is swimming around with a literary treasure wedged between its fins. Scholars still debate whether Twain's reverence for the river was genuine or a clever narrative device. Did he truly see the Mississippi as a living entity, or was it simply the most convenient metaphor for the unpredictability of life, its arithmeticability of life, a first arithmetic as you stand at the wheel, the fog swirling around you? The answer feels as elusive as the river's deepest channel. You lean into the night, the river's song in your ears, and realize you are not just learning to pilot a steamboat. You're learning to navigate the wild, wonderful currents of story itself. You drifting through a humid Mississippi evening, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle and coal smoke. The steamboat's paddle wheel groans, and a plume of black smoke billows into the sky. Panic ripples through the crew, shouts, the clang of metal, the sharp crackle of fire. You see Sam Clemens, barely out of boyhood, sprinting toward the engine room, his heart pounding with dread. In that instant, the river's promise of adventure turns to tragedy, a well-known literary fact. Mark Twain's younger brother, Henry Clemens, died in a horrific steamboat boiler explosion aboard the Pennsylvania in 1858, an event that haunted Twain for the rest of his life. The river, once his playground and proving ground, became the stage for his deepest sorrow. You watch as Sam, helpless and ash-smudged, searches for Henry in the chaos, his voice raw from shouting his brother's name. The memory of that night will echo in his writing, sometimes as dark humor, sometimes as a shadow that never quite lifts. Here's a lesser-known detail. Twain, racked by guilt, later visited a spiritualist to try to contact Henry's spirit. Yell had a prophetic dream about Henry's death just days before the explosion. A dream so vivid that Sam believed, in some corner of his mind, that he had failed to prevent the inevitable. You can almost feel the weight of that guilt pressing on his shoulders as he stands by the river bank, staring into the muddy water, searching for answers in the ripples. Scholars still debate whether Twain's fascination with fate and coincidence in his novels, those improbable twists, those hair's-breadth escapes, were shaped by this tragedy or by his natural love of Stortingling, a Kent. Was he exercising his grief or simply weaving the river's unpredictability into his fiction? As you watch Sam walk the silent decks at dawn, you sense both explanations swirling together. Impossible to separate it. The days after the explosion are heavy and slow. The steamboat, once so full of life and laughter, feels haunted. You hear the crew's hushed voices, the way they avoid Sam's gaze, the awkward silences that settle like silt. Sam throws himself into work, scrubbing decks and mending ropes, but nothing can scrub away the memory of that night. The river, usually so full of music and mischief, seems to mourn with him. Its surface dull and gray, its currents sluggish and cold. You find yourself remembering a joke Sam once made about steamboats. Badet's reliable as a politician's promise, likely to blow up when you least expect it. Oh, wow. The humor is brittle now, but you can see how Twain would later use laughter as armor, a way to keep sorrow at bay. He learns slowly that the river gives and the river takes, and that every pilot carries ghosts with him through the fog. One evening, as the sun sinks behind the bluffs, Sam sits by the water's edge, skipping stones and talking to the river as if it might answer back. Ansi tells it secrets, confesses regrets, asks if Henry is at peace. The river, as always, keeps its own counsel. Its only reply the gentle slap of waves against the shore. A quirky anecdote. In the months after Henry's death, Sam developed a superstition about river omens. He refused to board any boat with a black cat seen on deck, and he'd turn his hat backward before every voyage, convinced it would ward off disaster. The crew teased him mercilessly, but Sam never missed a ritual. You imagine him, head askew, eyes darting for feline stowaways, both mocking and believing in the river's mysterious ways. Scholars still debate whether Twain's turn toward satire and irony was a shield against grief or simply the natural evolution of his wit. Did the river's dangers make him cynical, or did they deepen his empathy for the world's follies and sorrows? Orsmitade, as you watch Sam scribble in his battered notebook by lantern light, you sense that every joke, every tall tale, is a way of keeping the darkness at bay. The river moves on, as rivers do. The steamboat's whistle sounds again, and you feel the current tugging you forward. Sam, changed but not broken, rises to his feet and prepares to face the next bend. The river has taught him that nothing lasts forever, not joy, not sorrow, not even the river itself. But the stories, they linger, echoing down the years like the call of a distant steamboat on a foggy night. You lean on the rail, letting the cool night air wash over you. Beyond in the distance, a frog croaks, and you can almost hear Henry's laughter in the wind. The river, ever mysterious, carries you onward toward new adventures, new heartbreaks, and the next chapter in Sam Clemens' journey up. You wake to the sound of silence, a silence so deep it feels like the river itself is holding its breath. The paddle wheel is still. The crew's laughter and shouts have faded, and the familiar steamboat whistles are nothing but echoes. You wander the empty deck, the boards creaking beneath your feet, and realize the world has changed. The Civil War has come, and the Mississippi, once a bustling artery of trade and travel, has become a border, a battleground, and for Sam Clemens, a dead end. A well-known literary fact. Twain's career as a river pilot ended abruptly when the war broke out, and towboat traffic ground to a halt, and Sam, like so many others, was forced to find a new path. You can almost see him, standing on the deserted docks, staring out at the water, feeling both stranded and restless. The river that once promised adventure now offers only uncertainty. Here's a quirky, lesser-known detail. For a brief, almost comical stint, Sam joined a ragtag Confederate militia, if you can call a handful of nervous young men with mismatched uniforms a militia. Their greatest accomplishment was getting lost in the woods and promptly disbanding after a few days. Sam later joked that he was a patinus soldier for 2 weeks and a hero for none, a line that would fit right in with his later irreverent humor. Scholars still debate whether Twain's brief brush with military life influenced his later skepticism toward authority and war. Did those bumbling days in the woods plant the seeds for his biting satire in Anspaugh and the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court? Or was Twain always a natural-born skeptic, with or without a uniform and orthomach? The answer, as always, seems to drift just out of reach, like a raft on the far side of the river. With the river closed to him, Sam looks west. You feel the tug of wanderlust in your own chest as he boards a stagecoach bound for Nevada, his pockets nearly empty, but his head buzzing with possibility. The landscape changes from lush riverbanks to dusty plains, from the humid embrace of the Mississippi to the dry electric air of the frontiers. The world is bigger than Sam ever imagined, and every mile brings new stories. You ride beside him, jostled by ruts in the road, listening to his running commentary on the absurdities of life out west. He tries his hand at silver mining, a disaster unless you count blisters and tall tales as treasure. He works as a journalist, spinning local gossip into biting columns, his wit sharpening with each new deadline. You can almost see the birth of Anspaugh and Mark Twain in these moments, Sam's voice growing bolder, his humor more pointed, his eye for human folly keener than ever. One joke Sam repeats to anyone who will listen: "I came out west to make my fortune and found I was already rich, in experience, if not in silver." Oh, wow. You can help but brim, imagining him holding up a handful of dust and calling it gold. Peculiar anecdote. While working for the Virginia City Territorial Enterprise, Sam once staged a fake duel with a rival journalist, a gong. The pistols were loaded with blanks, but the drama was real enough to send half the town into a panic. Sam loved to blur the line between fact and fiction, a habit that would later define his literary style. You picture him, hat tipped low, grinning as he watches the chaos unfold, already jotting down notes for a future story. Scholars still debate whether Twain's time in the West was a detour or a necessary crucible. Did the rough and tumble world of mining camps and saloons toughen his humor? Or was he always destined to poke fun at the powerful and the pompous Alcoast path? As you watch him scribble in his ever-present notebook, you sense that every failed venture, every misadventure, is just more fuel for the fire. The river is never far from Samuel's mind, though, on sleepless nights, he dreams of the Mississippi, of foggy mornings, and the steady thump of the paddle-wheel of free. You can almost hear the longing in his voice as he writes letters home, describing the wild beauty of the West, but always circling back to the river, as if it were the true north of his soul. You sit beside him in a dimly lit saloon, the air thick with cigar smoke and laughter. Sam spins yarns for the locals, his stories growing taller with each round of drinks. He's learning that humor can be a lifeline, a way to bridge the distance between past and present, between riverbanks and mountain ranges. The river may be far away, but its current still runs through him, shaping every story, every joke, every dream. As you drift into sleep, you feel the gentle pull of the river, even here in the dry Nevada air. The journey isn't over it, just taken a new course, winding through deserts and mountains, always searching for the way back to water. By you all perched on a rickety bar stool in a Nevada saloon, the air thick with the scent of whiskey and the low hum of poker chips. When you hear it for the first time, Mark Twain, what slips out almost by accident, a tossed-off joke in a newspaper column, but you feel the world shift ever so slightly. Sam Clemens, river pilot turned failed miner turned journalist, has just invented himself anew. The name is a wink, a code, a bit of river slang that only a true pilot would understand. You lean in, curious, as the legend begins to take shape, to the well-known literary fact. Mark Twain was a steamboat term, meaning 2 fathoms deep. Safe water for navigation, Anksom. Sam borrowed it from his river days, signing his articles with a pseudonym that promised both depth and safety. A little inside joke for anyone who ever worked a river. But here's the quirky twist. The name's debut was, by Twain's own admission, a bit of drunken mischief, and he was poking fun at a rival reporter's pretentious pen name, and, in a moment of tipsy inspiration, scribbled Mark Twain at the bottom of his column. The rest, as they say, is literary history. Scholars still debate whether Sam chose the name out of nostalgia or as a clever mask to distance himself from his failures and start fresh. Was it a tribute to the river or a shield against the disappointments of the West? The truth, like the river, is probably a little of both. Muddy, meandering, impossible to pin down, you watch as the name catches on. Mark Twain becomes a local celebrity. His columns the talk of every mining camp and gambling hall, from Virginia City to San Francisco, and his humor is sharp, his observations merciless, and his stories, well, just see they grow in the telling. You can almost hear the laughter echoing down the street, the way people lean in to catch every word, eager for a glimpse of the world through Twain's eyes, the one joke Twain loves to repeat, and for never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Oh, wow. You find yourself nodding along, especially when you recall that time he convinced half the town that a petrified man had been found in the hills, only to reveal the hoax with a flourish and a grin. The line between fact and fiction blurs, and you realize that, for Twain, storytelling is less about accuracy and more about impact. Peculiar anecdote. Twain once entered a frog jumping contest in Calaveras County, hoping to win enough money to pay off his bar tab. His frog, predictably, refused to jump, preferring to nap in the sun, while Twain spun the tale into one of his first great successes, the ciliated jumping frog of Calaveras County. The story's popularity launched Twain onto the national stage, proving that sometimes the stubborn frog can change your life. Scholars still debate whether Twain's embrace of the tall tale was a conscious literary strategy or simply a reflection of his upbringing among river storytellers and frontier tricksters. Did he invent the American voice? Or was he just the best at capturing what was already there, floating in the air like river mist? As you listen to Twain hold court in the saloon, you sense that he's both inventor and inheritor, a man who knows how to turn every setback into a punchline, and the river is never far from his thoughts. Though, click, even as he basks in his newfound fame, Twain writes letters home filled with longing for the Mississippi, the way the sun rises over the water, the sound of the paddle wheel at night, the endless possibilities that each new bend in the river brings. You can almost see him, pen in hand, sketching out the outlines of future novels, his mind drifting back to the muddy banks of Hannibal. One night, as the saloon empties out and the lamps burn low, Twain sits alone at a corner table, doodling steamboats in the margins of his notebook, and he's laughing quietly to himself, remembering the old river calls, Mark Twain, quarter less.
And you realize that, for all his reinvention, Sam Clemens is still a river boy at heart. You close your eyes, letting the sounds of the saloon fade into the gentle lapping of water against a wooden hull. The name Mark Twain echoes in your mind, a promise of safe passage, of stories yet to be told.
The river, it seems, is always waiting, ready to carry you home. You find yourself wandering the familiar muddy streets of Hannibal, Missouri, the town where Sam Clemens' childhood memories are as thick as the summer air. The Mississippi glimmers nearby, and you can almost hear the echo of boys' laughter, the slap of bare feet on sun-warmed cobblestones, and the distant call of a steamboat's whistle. Hannibal is more than a setting. It's a living scrapbook, and you sense that every fence, every alleyway, every shadowed cave will one day become immortal in the pages of Improvised The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. A well-known literary fact, Twain transformed his boyhood home into the fictional St.
Petersburg, a place that has become synonymous with the American coming of age story, but the whitewashed fence, the cave, the bustling main street, they are all real, drawn lovingly from the landscape of his youth. You see Sam, a freckled boy with a shock of unruly hair, eyeing a fence and plotting how to avoid the chore of painting it.
The trick, as you know, is to make the work look so enticing that everyone else begs for a turned. It's a classic Twain move, turning drudgery into opportunity, a sly wink at the reader, and a lesson in human nature. Here's a quirky anecdote. The real fence that inspired the famous scene was, actually whitewashed, until years after Twain wrote about it. The townspeople, eager to match the legend, painted it to match the story, blurring the line between fact and fiction in true Twain fashion. You can help but smirk, imagining Sam's delight at seeing his fictional world invade real life. Proof that sometimes stories shape reality as much as the other way around, as scholars still debate whether Twain's nostalgia for Hannibal was genuine or a satirical commentary on the myth of small-town innocence. Was he truly longing for the lost paradise of childhood, or was he poking fun at the very idea that such a place ever existed? As you stroll past the old Clemens house, you sense both affection and irony in the way Twain describes his boyhood haunts. You follow Sam and his friends, models for Tom, Huck, and Becky, down to the riverbank, where the water's thick with summer heat and possibility. They build rafts from driftwood, dare each other to explore the dark, twisting cave outside town, and concoct elaborate schemes to escape chores and schoolwork. You can almost taste the stolen apples, feel the rough bark of the treehouse ladder, and hear the conspiratorial whispers as they plan their next adventure. One joke that always gets a laugh. The less there is to justify a traditional custom, the harder it is to get rid of it. Oh, wow. You watch as Sam's friends line up to whitewash the fence, each convinced you're getting the better deal. It's a masterclass in persuasion, and you wonder how many readers have tried the same trick on their own siblings. The river is both playground and boundary, a place where freedom and danger coexist. You watch Sam and Huck drift downstream on a makeshift raft, the world shrinking to the lazy current and the endless sky overhead. They swap tall tales, dream of pirate treasure, and vow never to grow up. The river song is their anthem, a promise of escape, of adventure, of a life unbound by rules, a peculiar detail. The cave that inspired McDougall's cave in Hunt by Sawyer was a real place, and Twain once got lost inside for hours, convinced he'd never see daylight again. The experience left him with a lifelong fascination for mazes and mysteries, and you can see the glimmer of both fear and excitement in his eyes as he recounts the story to anyone who listen. Scholars still debate whether the darkness in Twain's childhood stories, the threats of violence, the specter of death, the ever-present river, reflects genuine trauma or literary embellishment. Munn. Was Hannibal a dangerous place? Or did Twain simply understand that every paradise has its shadows, and overall, shake, as you watch Sam scribble in his notebook beneath a willow tree, you sense that the answer, like the river, is always shifting. Night falls, and the town settles into a hush broken only by the chirr of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. Sam lies in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's adventures and dreaming up new ones. You realize that these memories, the friendships, the mischief, the moments of fear and wonder, are the raw material for his greatest works. The river outside his window is both a lullaby and a call to adventure, a reminder that the world is wide and full of stories waiting to be told. As you drift off, you hear the faint sound of a steamboat whistle, and know that, for Sam Clemens, Hannibal will always be home, real and imagined, lost and found, a place where every fence is worth painting, and every river bend hides a new adventure. You slip into the gentle current of memory, drifting alongside Sam as the Mississippi stretches before you, a ribbon of silver in the moonlight, endless and inviting. The river is no longer just a playground or a boundary. It's become a mirror, reflecting both the beauty and the danger of the world. As you float past sleepy towns and tangled forests, you sense the duality that will come to define Twain's greatest work. Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and the river, you realize, is both escape and test, sanctuary and threat, a place where freedom and peril are never far apart. A well-known literary fact, Twain's Huckleberry Finn is often hailed as the first true American novel, a story that captures the complexities of conscience, friendship, and the struggle between right and wrong. The raft journey down the Mississippi is more than an adventure. It's a moral awakening, a journey toward understanding in a world that anything but simple. You watch Huck and Jim drifting through fog and moonlight, their laughter mingling with the distant call of a whippoorwill. And you feel the weight of every choice, every fork in the river. But here's a quirky, lesser-known detail. Twain once admitted that he got hopelessly lost while writing the middle chapters of N.P.B's Huckleberry Finn. The story meandered much like the river itself, and for years he set the manuscript aside, convinced he'd never find his way back to the main current. It was only after a long hiatus and a change of scenery, writing in a quiet attic in Connecticut, far from the Mississippi, that Twain finally steered Huck and Jim toward the story's conclusion. You can't help but smile at the image of Twain, surrounded by stacks of paper, muttering about sandbars and literary snags. Scholars still debate whether the river in Untpisbury Finn is a symbol of freedom or of the impossibility of escape. Does it offer Huck and Jim a path to a new life? Or does it simply carry them in circles, always returning them to the world's injustices? Isaac Orthmashid. You watch as the raft floats through patches of mist, the banks shifting from wild forests to bustling towns, and you sense that the answer is as elusive as the river's ever-changing course. The river, in Twain's hands, is alive with contradictions. By day, it's a sunlit highway full of promise and laughter. By night, it's a shadowy labyrinth, echoing with strange noises and the distant threat of danger, that you hear the slap of water against the raft, the creak of wood,
the low murmur of conversation as Huck and Jim share secrets beneath a sky thick with stars. The river is their refuge, but it is also a test, a place where every decision matters, where the stakes are as real as the swirling current. One of Twain's favorite jokes about the river. It only place where you can be both lost and found at the same time. Oh, wow. You chuckle, imagining Huck's confusion as he tries to read the shifting signs of the water, never quite sure if he knows headed toward freedom or trouble. It's a feeling you can relate to, after all, who has felt adrift, caught between where you've been and where you going ent orsorally can orsortale. A peculiar anecdote. Twain was known to keep a miniature raft on his writing desk, a tiny model complete with a makeshift sail and 2 carved figures. He nudged it back and forth as he worked, sometimes talking to it, as if it could answer his questions about plot and character. Visitors to his study were often startled to find him deep in conversation with his annotation, but Twain insisted it helped him navigate the trickiest parts of the story. You picture him, brow furrowed, gently pushing the raft across a sea of manuscripts, searching for the right current. Scholars still debate whether Huckleberry Finn is ultimately optimistic or tragic. Does the river journey change Huck for the better, or does it simply reveal the world's harsh realities? Or smite, is Jim truly free at the end, or is freedom always just out of reach? Yes, Orthmatia. As you drift alongside the raft, you sense that Twain wanted readers to wrestle with these questions, to feel the pull of the current and the weight of every choice. The river, for all its beauty, is never entirely safe. Storms blow up without warning, hidden snags lurk beneath the surface, and the banks are sometimes lined with dangers both natural and human. You watch as Huck and Jim huddle together during a thunderstorm, the raft rocking wildly, lightning illuminating the fear and determination in their faces. It's a reminder that every journey on the river or in life comes with risks, and the courage is sometimes just the willingness to keep drifting, even when the way ahead is unclear. As dawn breaks, the river glows gold and pink, and you feel a sense of hope rising with the sun. The journey is over, and the river's story is far from finished. You close your eyes, letting the current carry you forward, knowing that every bend brings a new possibility, a new adventure, and a new question to ponder. You perched in the pilot house, the world spread out before you in shifting shades of blue and gold. As the river's secret language unfurls around you, the deck below bustles with activity, but up here it's just you, the wheel, and the endless winding water. You listen closely. A call rings out from the bow, Mark IV, and you feel the weight of those words, knowing that each cryptic phrase could mean the difference between safe passage and disaster. The river pilots speak in code, a dialect born of necessity and sharpened by rivalry, and you realize that to master the river, you must first master its hidden tongue. A well-known literary fact. Mark Twain's pen name comes directly from this world of river calls. Ark Twain was the leadsman shout for 2 fathoms, or 12 feet, deep enough for a steamboat to pass safely. Twain immortalized these calls in his memoir, Life on the Mississippi, where he describes the art of reading the river as a blend of science, intuition, and poetry. You imagine Sam, young and eager, straining to catch every syllable, his mind racing to decode the meaning behind each shouted number. Here's a quirky detail. River pilots were notorious for darting their knowledge, they'd invent new calls or twist old ones, hoping to confuse rival crews and keep the best route secret. Twain once recounted a prank where a pilot convinced a greenhorn that Quarter Twain meant clear. The poor fellow nearly ran his boat aground before the truth came out.
You couldn't help but laugh, picturing the chaos on deck and the smug satisfaction of the old hands as they watched the newcomer scramble. Scholars still debate whether Twain exaggerated the complexity of river calls for dramatic effect, or whether the system was truly as arcane as he claimed. Was it really a secret society with passwords and rituals, or just a group of practical men doing a dangerous job? And troll from each as you grip the wheel, trying to remember which call means danger and which means safe. You suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. The calls echo through the mist. Half Twain, 6 feet, quarter less, a little less than the marked depth. No bottom, too deep to measure. Each phrase is a lifeline, a warning, a promise. You feel the tension in your shoulders as the leadsman sings out his report, the sound bouncing off the water and disappearing into the fog. There's no time for second-guessing. Every decision must be made in an instant, every command obeyed without question, and one of Twain's favorite jokes about piloting: the river is always right, even when it's wrong. Oh, wow. You chuckle, realizing that the river doesn't care about your plans or your pride. It will humble even the most experienced pilot, given the chance. Twain loved to recount stories of pilots who lost their nerve, who froze at the wheel or misread a call only to be rescued by luck or the quick thinking of a crewmate. A peculiar anecdote. Twain once invented his own river call, Mark Twain and a half, just to see if anyone would question him. The crew played along, and the phrase briefly became a running joke among local pilots. You imagine the confusion of a rival boat hearing the call and scrambling to consult their charts, only to discover it didn't exist. Twain's mischief, it seems, was as boundless as the river itself. Can scholars still debate whether the secretiveness of river pilots was justified or simply a way to inflate their own importance? Did they truly possess mystical knowledge, or were they just very good at reading the signs of water, weather, and luck as the Orthminch? As you watch the river shift and shimmer beneath the morning sun, you realize that every pilot, like every writer, needs a little mystery to keep the world at bay. The pilot house becomes your sanctuary, a place where the noise of the world fades and only the river's voice remains. You learn to trust your instincts, to read the subtle cues, the way the current tugs at the hull, the color of the water near a sandbar, the sudden hush before a storm act. The river's code becomes second nature, a language you carry with you even on dry land. As night falls, you step out onto the deck, the air cool and sweet. The river glows in the moonlight, and you feel a sense of accomplishment, a quiet pride in having learned the language of the water. You know that, like Twain, you carry these calls with you always, a secret code for navigating the twists and turns of life. You close your eyes, letting the river's song wash over you, and drift into dreams where every shout from the bow is a promise of safe passage and new adventure. You step lightly onto the dew, slicked planks of an abandoned landing, the hush of dawn broken only by the distant croak of a bullfrog and the soft lap of water against sunken timbers. The river's surface is smooth as glass, but beneath it hides a graveyard of forgotten dreams. Here, in the shadows of willow trees and half-buried paddle wheels, you sense the ghosts of steamboats past, vessels that raced, ferried fortunes, and sometimes met their end in spectacular fashion. The Mississippi, you realize, is not just a highway, but a resting place, and Sam Clemens, ever the curious soul, was drawn to these watery relics like a moth to a lantern. A well-known literary fact, Twain's fascination with steamboat wrecks and river disasters is woven through Enspatize on the Mississippi and his other writings. He describes the river as both a giver and a taker, an endless stage for heroics, follies, and the occasional spectacular mishap. You picture him, boots muddy, poking through the remains of a wreck hull, collecting stories as easily as river stones. Each sunken boat is a chapter, each rusted bell a punchline waiting for the right setup. Here's a quirky anecdote. Twain once claimed he could identify the remains of a dozen different steamboats just by the shape of their paddle wheels or the peculiar twist of their boilers. He led friends on wreck hunting expeditions, narrating the history of each disaster with a mixture of reverence and irreverence. Once, he even convinced a group of gullible tourists that a pile of driftwood was the legendary spirit of the Delta, a boat that never actually existed outside his imagination, and you can't help but grin, imagining the look on their faces as Twain spun his tale, only to reveal the punchline with a twinkle in his eye. Scholars still debate whether Twain's obsession with Steamboat Graveyard was rooted in nostalgia, a fascination with disaster, or simply a love of storytelling. Did he see the wrecks as cautionary tales, reminders of the river's power, or as opportunities to poke fun at human hubris? Arthemide, as you wander among the half-submerged hulls, you sense all three currents at work: melancholy mischief, and a deep respect for the river's untyrannical might. The river bank is littered with relics: a paddle wheel half swallowed by mud, a rusted smokestack jutting from the reeds, the skeleton of a cargo crate tangled in wildflowers. You crouch beside a battered bell, its inscription worn smooth by years of flood and sun, and try to imagine the lives it once governed. The frantic calls of inspies all aboard, the clatter of cargo, the laughter of passengers on moonlit nights. Each artifice backs is a fragment of a vanished world, and you feel a bittersweet thrill at piecing together the stories they left behind. Ed Twain, ever the showman, loved to recount the time he narrowly escaped disaster when a rival pilot tried to cut corners during a race, only to run aground on a hidden sandbar. There's nothing like a little competition to make a man forget his common sense, he say, shaking his head with mock solemnity. You can almost hear the echo of his laughter in the morning mist, the river itself joining in the joke. A peculiar detail. Twain once wrote that he dreamed of building a museum of river relics, a place where every broken paddle, every scorched ledger, would tell its own story. The museum never materialized, but you get the sense that, in his books, he created something even better: a living archive, open to anyone willing to listen to the river's whispers. Scholars still debate whether Twain's river was a symbol of progress or a graveyard for lost ambitions. Was the Mississippi a path to the future, or a reminder that all journeys end in the same muddy embrace? As you sift through the silt, you realize that for Twain the answer was always a little bit of both, a celebration of movement and a meditation on loss. You pause to watch a school of catfish swirl around a submerged paddle, their silver bodies flickering in the dappled light. The river, indifferent to the fate of steamboats and pilots, goes on as if you sense that Twain, for all his jokes and jabs, understood this better than anyone. The river gives, the river takes, and the stories it leaves behind are as much a part of its current as the water itself. As the sun climbs higher, you brush the mud from your hands and step back onto the living deck, the ghosts of the steamboat graveyard fading into memory. The river flows on, and with it the next chapter of Twain's journey, always searching, always collecting, always laughing at the folly of trying to master a force that can never truly be tamed. You, settled on a shady porch, the river gliding by in the hazy distance, when you notice Sam hunched over a stack of yellowed paper, his pen scratching furiously as he writes letter after letter. The breeze carries the scent of water and wild mint, and you realize these aren't just any letters. They are confessions, pleas, and musings sent to friends, editors, and sometimes to the river itself. Twain's correspondence is a lifeline, a way to keep the river close even when he's landlocked in some bustling city or far-flung hotel room. A Town Tonight, you get to peek into the secret heart of a writer who never truly left the water behind, a well-known literary fact. Twain was a prolific letter writer, and his correspondence reveals as much about his creative process as his published works. In these letters he often confessed his fear of creative drought, of being unstranded, far from the inspiration the river once provided at You can almost hear the anxiety in his words, the restless longing for the Mississippi's unpredictable flow aroused. He writes, "I am like a steamboat tied up at the dock, watching the current slip by, wondering if I ever set out again." It's a sentiment every creative soul knows too well. Here's a quirky detail. Twain sometimes addressed letters to the river itself, as if it were an old friend or a mischievous rival. In one draft, he scolds the river for upbraiding away with my best ideas, and demands it return at least a few of them before I run dry. You can help but chuckle at the image of Twain, pen wagging, shaking his fist at the muddy water as if it might answer back. The river, of course, remains silent, except in his dreams, where it always has something sly to say. Scholars still debate whether Twain's dependence on the river for inspiration was genuine or part of his carefully crafted public persona. Did he truly need the Mississippi to write? Or was the river a convenient muse to blame when the words wouldn't come? At Orsmachai, as you read over his shoulder, you sense a bit of both. A real yearning, mixed with a performer's knack for myth making. You watch Twain at his desk, his brow furrowed, his pen sometimes pausing as he stares out the window, lost in the memory of river banks and paddle wheels. He writes to friends about the unexplainable ache of being away from the water, about the way city life grates on his nerves. There is no poetry in cobblestones, he laments, and the only current here is the one that sweeps me along with the crowd. The river, by contrast, is a place where he can drift, dream, and discover the stories that matter. Can't one joke Twain shares in a letter to a fellow writer. Improvise, if I ever run out of stories, I'll just blame the river for changing course. Oh, wow. You get the feeling he means it after all. The Mississippi is famous for its meanders, its habit of abandoning old channels and carving out new ones overnight. Twain knows that sometimes. To find your way, you have to let yourself drift, even if it means getting a little lost. Peculiar anecdote. Twain once received a letter from a fan who claimed to have found one of his lost stories floating in a bottle on the river. The story, it turned out, was a clever forgery. But Twain was so delighted by the idea that he replied with a tall tale of his own, insisting that the river had a habit of empressing his work without his consent. You can imagine the fan's delight at being drawn into Twain's playful world, where the line between fact and fiction is always shifting. The scholars still debate whether Twain's letters are more honest than his fiction, or whether they just another stage for his wit and wisdom. Are we seeing the real Sam Clemens, or another character in the ongoing story of Mark Twain, Huck and Tom? As you watch him seal another envelope, you realize that for Twain, every letter is a raft, a way to stay afloat, to reach out, to keep moving even when the water seems still. The sun sets, painting the river in shades of gold and purple, and you feel a quiet kinship with Twain's longing. The river may be far away, but its current runs through every word, every joke, every hope that tomorrow will bring a new story. You close your eyes and listen to the gentle lap of water, knowing that as long as there are letters to write, the journey will never truly end. You find yourself in a raucous parlor, laughter bubbling up like river foam as Twain holds court, spinning yarns that leave the crowd in stitches. The air is thick with cigar smoke and the sweet tang of bourbon, and you realize that the river's gift is just adventure or nostalgia. It's the endless supply of stories, jokes, and tall tales that Twain would use to skewer the follies of his age. Tonight, you are swept along by the current of his wit, marveling at how river folklore becomes a weapon in Twain's arsenal, aimed squarely at the pretensions and greed of Gilded Age America. The well-known literary fact, Twain's humor, especially in works like Inspison's The Gilded Age and Unfruffing It, is rooted in the extraordinary traditions of the river. He borrowed the cadence, exaggeration, and sly irony of riverboat banter, transforming a local color into biting social satire. You can almost hear the echoes of river pilots and deckhands in his dialogue, their tall tales stretched to the breaking point and then snapped back with a wink. Here's a quirky detail. Twain was notorious for insulting his lectures with outlandish anecdotes he claimed were overheard on the river. Click once. He told an audience about a catfish so large it sank a steamboat, only to double down when challenged. Consequently, if you don't believe me, you can ask the catfish. The crowd roared and Twain grinned, knowing that the best lies are the ones everyone wants to believe. If only for a moment, scholars still debate whether Twain's use of river folklore was a celebration of American myth or a subtle critique of the nation's appetite for spectacle and self-deception. Was he elevating the wisdom of ordinary folks, or poking fun at their willingness to swallow the most outrageous stories? Asked Aufrufschmidt as you watch Twain work the room. You sense that he's doing both, delighting in the absurdity while slyly exposing the truth beneath the laughter. You drift from table to table, eavesdropping on the stories that swirl around Twain like eddies in the current. There's the tale of the gambler who tried to outwit the river and ended up outwitted by his own luck. The preacher who mistook a shoal for a sign from heaven and had to be rescued by a passing barge. The steamboat captain who claimed he could navigate blindfolded and proved it by running aground in full daylight. Each story is a little masterpiece of timing and exaggeration, a testament to the river's endless capacity for surprise. Twain's favorite joke tonight: the difference between a taxidermist and a tax collector? The taxidermist only takes your skin. Oh, wow. The crowd howls and you can not help but join in, recognizing the gleeful jab at authority that runs through all Twain's work. He's not just telling stories. He's inviting his listeners to question, to laugh, to see the world with fresh, skeptical eyes. As peculiar anecdote. Twain once tried to copyright a joke he'd heard on the river, only to discover that it had already been told in various forms up and down the Mississippi for decades. The river owns the joke, he concluded, and I'm just borrowing it for a while. You imagine the river as a great rolling archive of laughter and wisdom, its stories passed from boat to boat, always changing, never quite the same. Scholars still debate whether Twain's humor was a mask for deeper sorrow, or a genuine expression of joy. Was he laughing to keep from crying, or did he truly believe in the redemptive power of laughter? Akent Ersrage, as you watch him raise a glass and toast the river, you sense that, for Twain, humor was both shield and sword, a way to survive, to connect, and to keep the current of life moving forward. The night deepens, the laughter fades, and you step outside into the cool air. The river glimmers in the moonlight, its surface rippling with secrets of. You realize that every joke, every story is a way of making sense of the world's chaos, of finding order in the swirl of water and fate. Twain's river is a place of endless possibility, where truth and fiction dance together, and every punchline is a promise that the story will go on. You close your eyes, letting the echoes of laughter drift away, and feel the river's current tugging you onward, always toward the next tale, the next adventure, the next moment of wonder.
tucked away in a dusty attic, sunlight slanting through the window and illuminating a curious treasure spread across the floor. A hand-drawn map, its edges curled and its surface crisscrossed with rivers, towns, and mysterious symbols. Twain sits nearby, a mischievous smile playing on his lips as he explains that this is no ordinary map. It's his own imagined Mississippi, a patchwork of real and invented places, each with a story, a joke, or a secret attached.
Tonight, you get to explore Twain's forgotten cartography, where every bend in the river leads to a new world, and the well-known literary fact. Twain's attention to geography and the sense of place in his novels is legendary. Huckleberry Finn and Ontapine Sawyer are anchored by the Mississippi's real twists and turns. But Twain also delighted in inventing towns, islands, and landmarks, blending fact and fiction until the line all but disappeared.
You trace your finger along the map, noting familiar names like Hannibal and St. Louis, but also places that exist only in Twain's imagination. Lost Dog Island, Slippery Bend, and the infamous Dead Man's Hollow, Asia. Here's a quirky detail.
Twain's map, long forgotten in a trunk, was rediscovered decades after his death, and found to contain several towns and features that later appeared, almost word for word, in the fantasy maps of modern authors. Some scholars suspect that Twain's playful blending of real and invented geography inspired generations of world builders, from Verigi to L. Frank Baum. You can help but chuckle at the idea of Twain as the secret cartographer behind so many fictional worlds, his influence winding through literature like the river itself. Scholars still debate whether Twain intended his map as a serious creative tool or as an elaborate joke. Was he charting out his stories, or just amusing himself by inventing places he wished he could visit? Oculus Moshe, as you study the names, some whimsical, some ominous, you sense that for Twain the act of mapping was another form of storytelling, a way to shape the world to fit his sense of humor and wonder. You watch Twain as he adds a new town to the map, pausing to invent a scandalous history and a cast of eccentric residents. Every good map needs a secret or two, he says, winking. Otherwise, what's the point of exploring?
Oh, wow. You laugh, imagining Huck and Tom setting out on a raft, determined to find the legendary treasure cave, or to escape the clutches of the fearsome widow McGinty, whose only crime is an overzealous love of pickled beets. A favorite joke Twain scribbles in the map's margin. In gentle, slow, elderly males, here be lawyers. Turn back while you can. You grin, recognizing the sly poke at authority and the endless parade of busybodies who populate his stories. The map is more than a guide. It's a playground, a place where the rules are always up for negotiation and the journey is more important than the destination. A peculiar anecdote. Twain once challenged a group of friends to use his map for a real-life scavenger hunt along the river. Wick the result. 3 days of confusion, laughter, and wild goose chases as the group tried to find places that existed only in Twain's imagination. The adventure ended with a picnic on a sandbar, where Twain revealed the hoax and awarded everyone accomplices to tell tall tales. Signed and sealed with river mud. You can almost hear the laughter echoing across the water, proof that the best journeys are the ones that never quite go as planned. Scholars still debate whether Twain's invented geography was a subtle commentary on the unreliability of memory and history. Was he reminding us that all maps are, in some sense, fictions, approximations of a world too vast and wild to ever be fully captured? Approximations. As you roll up the map, you realize that for Twain, every journey, real or imagined, begins with the willingness to get a little lost. The attic grows dim as the sun sets, and you tuck the map away, its secrets safe for another day. You sense that Twain's greatest gift wasn't just his stories, but his invitation to explore, to wander, to wonder, to believe that somewhere,
Just around the next bend, there was a new world waiting to be discovered. You close your eyes, the map's winding river still vivid in your mind, and let yourself drift, trusting that the current will carry you somewhere strange and wonderful. You gliding through a thick, rolling fog, the river muffled and mysterious when a chill prickles down your spine. The lantern's glow barely pierces the mist, and every sound, the creak of timber, the distant hoot of an owl, feels amplified, uncanny. Twain stands beside you, his eyes narrowed as if searching for something just out of sight. Tonight, the river is a place of secrets and shadows, and you find yourself caught in the eerie world that inspired some of Twain's most mysterious and supernatural tales, well-known literary fact. Twain's fascination with doubles, doppelgangers, and the uncanny is evident in stories like The Mysterious Stranger and Inchterbice 44. The double. The river, with its shifting mists and echoing calls, became a perfect setting for these tales of the inexplicable. You sense that, for Twain, the Mississippi was sometimes less a highway and more a haunted corridor, a place where reality and imagination blurred. Here's a quirky detail. Twain claimed to have experienced several family encounters while piloting steamboats. Once, he insisted he saw a ghostly figure waving from the bank, only to discover later that no one lived within miles of that stretch of river. Another time, he woke in the night convinced he'd heard his name called from the water, a story he retold with a mixture of mock terror and delight at every dinner party for years. You could almost see him, eyes wide, spinning the tale for an audience eager to be spooked. Scholars still debate whether Twain's supernatural stories were inspired by genuine belief, playful invention, or a clever way to tap into the era's fascination with spiritualism and the unknown. Was Twain a skeptic at heart? Or did the river's fog awaken something more credulous in him? Arithmetage, as you drift through the mist, the answer feels as elusive as the shadowy shapes gliding alongside your boat. The fog thickens and you hear Twain recounting an old river legend, the tale of the phantom steamboat, forever lost in the mists, its whistle echoing on moonless nights. Kilots would swear they'd seen its lights bobbing in the distance, only for the vision to vanish as suddenly as it appeared. Twain, ever the showman, loved to embellish these stories, adding details, a spectral crew, a captain doomed to search for safe harbor for all eternity, until listeners shivered with delight and suspicion. One of Twain's favorite jokes about the supernatural: I do not fear ghosts. I only wish they would pay rent if they insist on haunting my house. Oh, wow. You laugh, picturing Twain negotiating with a translucent tenant, ever the practical joker, even in the face of the unknown. A peculiar anecdote. Twain once attempted to host a patience aboard a moored steamboat, inviting friends, skeptics, and a self-proclaimed medium. The night was filled with more laughter than revelations, especially when the spirit spelled out a message that turned out to be an advertisement for a local bakery, courtesy of Twain's own sleight of hand. The guests left convinced that if there were ghosts on the river, they'd need a better sense of humor to keep up with Twain. Scholars still debate whether Twain's flirtation with the supernatural was merely a reflection of his times, or a deeper, more personal exploration of fate, coincidence, and mortality. Did the river's fog remind him of all that can to be explained, or was it just another stage for his storytelling genius? As you listen to the soft splash of water and the distant, unplaceable sounds, you realize that for Twain, mystery was just another kind of adventure. One best faced with curiosity and a wry smile. The fog finally lifts, revealing the familiar banks and the reassuring glow of lanterns on shore. You feel a sense of relief, but also a lingering wonder at the river's power to unsettle and inspire. Twain turns to you, grinning, and says, "Nothing like a little mystery to keep the journey interesting." You nod, knowing that as long as you travel this river, there will always be shadows to chase, stories to tell, and questions that refuse to be answered.
You close your eyes, letting the last wisps of fog curl around you, and drift deeper into the night, comforted by the knowledge that even the strangest tales are welcome on Twain's river. You're older now, the lines on your hands etched deep as river channels, and the world seems to move a little slower than it used to, Mom.
The Mississippi, once wild and untamable, now bears the scars of progress. Factories puffing smoke along its banks, barges hauling cargo where steamboats once raced for glory. You walk beside Samuel Clemens, now Mark Twain, white-haired and whirled, weary, as he returns to the river for one final journey, reckoned.
The air is tinged with nostalgia and a hint of mourning,
for both the man and the waterway he loved, quick, well-known literary fact. In his later years, Twain revisited the Mississippi for a grand tour, chronicling the experience in the latter chapters of Infopies on the Mississippi. He found the river changed, its romance dimmed by industry and pollution, its wildness tamed by commerce. You watch him gaze out over the water, his eyes searching for the ghosts of paddle wheels and the laughter of boys on rafts. The world has moved on, and Twain feels the ache of time's passage as keenly as any loss. Here's a quirky detail. Twain, ever the showman, insisted on wearing his trademark white suit for the entire journey, even in the sweltering heat of a Mississippi summer. He claimed it kept him cool. But you suspect he enjoyed the spectacle of it, the way children would point and whisper, "There goes Mark Twain." He'd tip his hat and wink, playing the part of the river's elder statesman, even as his heart broke for what had been lost. Scholars still debate whether Twain's late life melancholy was genuine or exaggerated for literary effect. Was he truly heartbroken over the river's transformation, or did he see in its decline a metaphor for his own fading vitality? Arthemide as you walk beside him, the answer seems to shimmer and shift like sunlight on water, sometimes sorrow, sometimes satire, always layered with meaning. You board a steamboat for the last time, the deck groaning underfoot, the paddle wheel turning with a tired sigh. Twain stands at the rail, his white suit immaculate, his hair wild in the breeze. He points out landmarks from his youth, now obscured by smokestacks and warehouses, and tells stories of races won and lost, of friends long gone, of a river that once seemed endless and immortal. You sense that he's saying goodbye, not just to the Mississippi, but to a whole era of American life. One of Twain's favorite jokes on this journey. In Prucki's the river used to be my friend. Now it's just another old acquaintance who doesn't remember my name. Oh, wow. The crew laughs, but you catch a flicker of sadness behind his smile. The river, for all its changes, still carries echoes of the past. If you listen closely enough, a somewhat peculiar anecdote. During this final tour, Twain insisted on piloting the boat himself for a short stretch, despite protests from the captain. His hands shook, his eyesight wasn't what it once was, but for a few glorious minutes he was a boy again, reading the water, calling out depths, feeling the old thrill of command. The crew held their breath, and when he finally relinquished the wheel, they erupted in applause.
Twain bowed, tears in his eyes, and whispered, "Aunt Spiaz, once more, just once more." Scholars still debate whether Twain's elegiac tone in his late writings is a lament for the river, for youth, or for the country itself, changed by war, industry, and the relentless march of time.
Is the river's in death a personal loss, or a national one? As Orthmichai, as you stand beside him, watching the sun set over the water, you feel the weight of all these questions. Heavy as the humid air, a Kent night falls, and the river glows with the lights of distant towns. Twain sits quietly on deck, his story spent, his gaze fixed on the horizon. You realize that, for all the changes, the river still flows, still carries memories, still sings its ancient song. Twain leans over and murmurs, "Con, the river's not dead. It's just dreaming in a different key." You close your eyes, letting the gentle rocking of the boat lull you, and know that even as eras end, the current of story carries on, soft, persistent, and eternal. You awaken to a sky streaked with dawn, the river below a mirror of soft pinks and golds. There's a hush in the air, a sense of anticipation that prickles your skin. Mark Twain stands beside you, his white suit glowing in the early light, his eyes reflecting both the river's shimmer and the weight of years today. The world seems to pause, holding its breath for a moment of cosmic symmetry. Halley's Comet, the celestial wanderer, is returning, just as it did the year Twain was born, acts the well-known literary fact. Twain famously predicted he would die with Halley's Comet, having entered the world in 1835 as the comet blazed across the sky. In 1910, as the comet returned, Twain's life drew to a close, the poet of the river departing with the same celestial spectacle that heralded his arrival as you stand with him on the river bank, watching the faint glow of the comet's tail, and feel the strange, beautiful symmetry of a life so deeply tied to the rhythms of nature and fate, Azores and fate. Here's a quirky detail. Twain joked to friends that the Almighty has said, no doubt, and while here are these two unaccountable freaks. They came in together, they must go out together. He relished the idea of sharing an exit with a comet, as if the universe itself recognized the singularity of his journey.
You can almost hear him chuckling, a little defiant, a little awed, as he contemplates the cosmic joke. The scholars still debate whether Twain's sense of destiny was sincere, or just another of his elaborate performances. And did he truly believe in fate, or was he simply spinning one last grand narrative for his audience? And
as you watch the comet's arc reflected in the Mississippi, you sense that Twain's genius lay in making every moment, mundane or miraculous, feel like part of a larger, mysterious story. The river is quiet now. The steamboat's gone, the towns along its banks waking slowly.
Twain sits on a weathered bench, his hands folded in his lap, his gaze fixed on the horizon. You sense his peace, his readiness. He speaks softly, almost to himself. I have had a long, curious journey, and the river has been my companion through it all. I hope it remembers me kindly.
You sit beside him, feeling the gentle tug of the current, the eternal motion that links every life and every story. A final joke lingers in the air. If you hear a splash when I'm gone, don't worry. It's just me sneaking aboard the next raft.
Oh, wow. You smile, picturing Twain, hat-tipped, drifting off toward the unknown, forever part of the river's lore. A peculiar anecdote. After Twain's passing, some of his friends claimed to see his ghost wandering the river banks at dusk, notebook in hand, still jotting down stories. Whether true or not, you like to imagine him there, a part of the landscape he loved, his spirit woven into every bend and whisper of the Mississippi. Wisdom scholars still debate whether Twain's greatest legacy is his humor, his honesty, or his boundless curiosity. Is it his novels, his essays, or simply the way he taught us to see the world anew? With skepticism, wonder, and a willingness to follow the current wherever it leads, as the comet fades and the river glows with morning light, you realize that the answer is all of these, and more. The journey ends as it began, with the river, the sky, and the promise of another story just around the bend. You stand on the bank, the water lapping at your feet, and whisper a quiet goodbye to the poet of the Mississippi, knowing that as long as the river flows, his voice will echo in its song. Now, as the river's current slows and the sky brightens with the promise of a gentle day, you let your breath deepen and your thoughts drift on the stories, the laughter, and the gentle mysteries of Twain's world swirl together, softening into a comforting haze.
You feel the warmth of the sun on your face, the cool whisper of water nearby, and the steady, reassuring rhythm of the river beneath it all. Let your muscles relax, your eyelids grow heavy. Imagine the Mississippi's endless journey, winding through fields and forests, past towns both real and imagined, carrying with it the memories of all who have wandered its banks. 'Cause
each ripple is a story, each breeze a whisper from Twain himself, reminding you that adventure and peace can live side by side if your mind drifts to Huck and Tom, to lost journals and ghostly steamboats. Let those images float gently by, like leaves on the water, unhurried and free. There's no need to chase them. They'll return when you ready, always waiting in the soft twilight of memory. The river is patient, and so are the stories it holds. As you settle in, let the gentle hush of Twain's river cradle your thoughts. With every breath, the world grows quieter, the current softer, until all that remains is a sense of calm and belonging. You are part of the river's story now, a listener, a dreamer, a quiet companion to the poet who found his truth in the winding waters. Good night, and may your dreams be as gentle and surprising as a raft ride on a summer night. The river flows on, and you too are carried forward, safe, peaceful, and at ease.